All right, so now we're going to talk about a drug that's been near and dear to me for many, many years. I investigated clandestine drug labs for probably about 6 years in the Phoenix market. And actually, saying the Phoenix market, it was literally the whole valley. I want to explain my first experience with crystal meth. They call it crystal meth. I moved from Minnesota in 1991 to Phoenix, Arizona, joined the police academy, went through the academy, got out in November, was assigned to a shift 2 for a while, and then I was put on shift 3, which most new officers are put on shift 3. So I was working shift 3 up in the Cave Creek and Cactus area, and responded to a call one night. It was late. 1, 2, 3 in the morning. I'm not sure, but whatever. It was like a Jack in the Box at Cave Creek and Cactus. Not even sure if it's there anymore. But I responded to this call of a person. It was an emergency call of a person that climbed in through the drive-through window and was hiding under the French fry vat, or whatever the oil vats that they fry, whatever they fry at Jack in the Box, French fries and chicken nuggets and whatever else Jack in the Box sells. And I want to say it was during the night because the store wasn't open, or the restaurant wasn't open, just the drive-through. So I responded, and this guy was hiding under the French fry vats. It was hot under there, like really hot. Like, as a matter of fact, he got burns from hiding under this vat. And when he came out, he said that he was being followed and people were trying to kill him. And I believed him. I mean, I was new from Minnesota. I was a little bit naive. The only drugs I ever saw in Minnesota was this kid on my school bus that smoked pot. And he'd roll down the window, a couple cracks, and take a hit off of a pipe. I smelt it. That's first and only time I smelt marijuana until I moved to Phoenix, Arizona. It was basically thrust into the stash house for America, right? So as I was interviewing this guy, he said there was people following him in a vehicle and they're trying to kill him. So I'm interviewing him and asking him questions because I believed him, and asking him all these questions like, hey, what'd they look like? And then he started giving vehicle descriptions. He said they're all black vehicles. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird. And then he said that he thinks he was pretty sure he heard a helicopter. And I'm like, all right. So now the cuckoo factor, or the craziness factor, was going off, and and another officer had shown up, and he was kind of sitting back there letting me do the interviewing because I was new. And so after I was talking to the guy for a while, the officer said, hey, this guy's a tweaker. I go, what's a tweaker? He goes, he's a meth user. And I go, meth? He goes, yeah. Meth causes extreme paranoia. People think they're being followed, and all these behaviors and everything's explaining that sounds like a tweaker. So that was my first experience with a meth user. And fire department was out there. They treated him for burns on his back and everything. So I started thinking, I'm like, what would possess a person to like risk their life by hiding under an oil vat, or like the fryers, and dive through a drive-through window and hide under there and hide from people thinking that they're being followed. And so I started researching methamphetamine more, started interacting with a lot more people on the street. Just to let you know, like shift 3, the night shift, as we're going to go through, you're going to find out tweakers don't sleep. They're up for a long time. Like, they'll be up for days. Sometimes they're up for weeks, and they don't sleep. So they're going all night long. And that's why this is it's the most nastiest drug I've ever seen. It's the most dangerous drug I've ever seen. Ironically, it's classified as a dangerous drug. It's a stimulant. So what we're going to do is we're going to see actually how the drug is manufactured. We're going to go through that section really quick, but I don't want to overlook it, because when you see what goes into methamphetamine, then you're going to see why this drug makes you so crazy. Okay, so let us get started here. All right, so good old methamphetamine. Ice, glass, tweak, speed, crystal, crank, G. And there's other terms there's a lot of different street terms. Tina, glass, and G. G originated from the term glass, and G is probably the most popular street slang term for methamphetamine. So this is actually real methamphetamine that I recovered. All these photos you're going to see in here are mine. I'll let you know if they're not mine, but I take pride in a lot of my photos just because I worked drugs for so many years. I was able to obtain really good photos and of, my own actual photos. I don't have to use other people's material in their photos, illustrations. So this is crystal, glass. You can see why they call it glass. It looks like shards of glass, right? And then and G originated, like I said, from the term glass. So this is a real old slide, and I left it in here intentionally. And this is just to show at its peak in 2010. This wasn't actually even at its peak. At its peak, it was even higher. But these are, as a matter of fact, this isn't even. I was looking at California. I looked at California first, and I thought, 186 labs. This is when meth labs were pretty much tanking, because I was out of drug enforcement at this point. I had gone to the repeat offender program in 2006. I spent 6 years there doing surveillance on career criminals. So this would be about 4 years later. And you can see, so California still has its fair share, but California is huge. Look at Arizona. 5 labs were seized in 1 calendar year. 5 labs. Like we were doing like a lab a day. We were doing easily 5 to 10 labs a week on our unit. So it just goes to show how the shift to Mexican cartels making methamphetamine in Mexico and smuggling it up through the border has really eliminated a lot of the meth production domestically. Now, as you look at this map here, though, of meth labs seized, you're going to see Minnesota with 10, Iowa with 291. I'm not sure over here. I don't get down in here. I think this might be Missouri. But these huge numbers here are the anhydrous ammonia labs I told you about, where they're just really small. As a matter of fact, like you could take a small bottle like this and create a meth lab in it with just chemicals. I intended to show you this during the marijuana section, and this is going to be on the quiz. So any of you that are just skipping ahead or looking up answers, I'm showing this bottle here. Some of you are probably doing other things, and now I just told you, and so you're going to pay attention. But this is a detoxifier. It's called Ready Clean. This was $25. I actually just drained it yesterday. I've had this thing since 1998. And one of my kids said, that was an antique. You maybe could have sold it. Well, look at how nasty it is. So $25 to pass a drug test. That's what this is designed for. Ready Clean. And they sell this for $25 so that you can pass a drug test. And that's why they overcharge, because their target market is people that want to pass drug tests to get hired. So if you look at this, it says the number one seller because it works. Double money back guarantee. See that? If you read the directions, that's where my age comes in, right? It says, if time permits, for the 2 days prior to the day of your deadline, it doesn't say what kind of deadline it is, avoid toxins and consume a recommended allowance of 6 16-ounce glasses of water per day. Like I try to drink a gallon of water a day. This is a lot of drinking. What this will do is it will not remove marijuana cannabinoids from your system. And like when we talk about meth, and actually most of the drugs, they're all water-based. So like methamphetamine, if you ingest methamphetamine, and we're going to talk about how you get it into your system, meth passes through your system in about 2 to 5 days because it's water-based. So you excrete it from your body through sweat, perspiration, urination. Marijuana is oil-based. So the actual cannabinoids, or the oil, the marijuana oil actually, the active ingredients goes into your fat cells. So it'll stay in your system for a long time. And because it's fat-based or oil-based, the only way to actually get rid of cannabinoids in your system is to metabolize them, like burn them off. So if you're like a marathon runner and you're really lean, don't have a lot of body fat, and you smoke marijuana, you can your body's going to burn through that fat a lot quicker. And you may be able to take, like smoke a drug, marijuana. You might be able to smoke marijuana on a Friday, and then like by next Friday, you might be able to pass a drug test and not show up positive for marijuana because you don't have a lot of body fat and you're metabolizing that fat. So it can't metabolize fat. I mean, it's just if your fat and the marijuana is in your fat, the only way to get rid of it is, like I said, burn it. So what does this do? It dilutes your sample. Basically, it dilutes it so that your sample comes up diluted, and they say you got to retest. Now, they don't tell you that on here. They just say it'll dilute it. They don't say it'll dilute your sample, but that's what it does. So what's the question that's going to be on your quiz? What's the name of this product? Yeah. So if you're listening and you weren't paying attention, you didn't watch it, now you got to watch it. Anyways, so how long does marijuana stay in your system? Generally, 30 to 60 to 90 days. And we didn't mention that during the section, but we're going to mention it now because we're getting into water-based drugs. How long is meth in your system? About 2 to 5 days. Same with most of the other drugs. All right. So here's crystal meth. This is a bag, like a $20 bag. There's some rocks. And this right over here, these are ounce sacks. So an ounce sells for approximately about $1,000. I'd say $800 to $1,000, depending. And prices have come down a lot more just because of the volume being made by the cartels. But again, it all comes down to purity, and it comes down to the quality. So that's why drug prices will fluctuate based on how good they are. This is actually methamphetamine that I can't remember. I think I actually made this meth. I've actually made methamphetamine 3 times during training, DEA-sponsored training in a laboratory where we actually did a cook. And I was part of the Clan Lab Investigators Association. Every year we'd go to the conference, and so for 3 of those years I made meth, and then after that it's like, well, you make meth and you investigate meth labs all day, you pretty much know what there is to know about it. And they realized that, and so what'd they do? They created other labs. So I've made ecstasy, and I've also made GHB, gamma hydroxybutyrate, which we'll talk about. So they have you do it, so not so you can retire and go be a drug cook, right? But so that you know when you're investigating in a lab how the drug's being made, the chemicals used, and then also when you testify, you can testify to what you have, because as you're going to see with a meth lab, they're household chemicals. Like you have Drano, and we'll get into that. But the point is how do you say this person is possessing all these common household chemicals and equipment to make drugs versus, hey, they just have 8 bottles of Drano under their sink because they got them on sale. So those are things that we had to learn and know. Okay, so who uses this stuff? Predominantly, if you look back at the history, right? Who was making the drug back in the 60s, 70s, 80s? It was outlaw biker gangs. Now, most of your outlaw biker gangs, some of them have tendencies to be more white supremacist, discriminatory towards other minority groups. And so a lot of the drugs, the methamphetamine and amphetamines that were being made by the bikers, and they sold to people that they associated with or that they wanted to sell to. So they weren't selling to minority groups, and minority groups weren't buying meth. It was just kind of one of those things. A lot of drugs have some ethnic base to it, or demography, right? So these are photos seized from a drug lab where it actually exploded in the house. It was an apartment, actually. And I'm going to show you that later. You're going to see this actual scene here. So you may say, well, why do we seize photos and all that? Because there's evidence. Like, look, they're shooting up methamphetamine. Like, that's right here. This is a loaded syringe. And I guess I could move myself here, right? Look at that. They're shooting up methamphetamine in this apartment. And she looks like she's already crashing. And she's just having a good time. All right. So how I mentioned that the meth users predominantly been Caucasian or white, and age doesn't so much matter, but it's changing, and it actually changed when the Mexican cartels got into the business. So think about it, like why would it change? Like, why did you not have the Hispanic culture or the African American or black culture using methamphetamine before? Because they didn't have access to it. It wasn't a drug they gravitated for or to. A lot of your African American or black population, their choice of stimulant is cocaine and crack, and we'll explore that. But with meth, it was the Caucasians that was their choice of stimulant. So it changed, though, when the Mexican cartels got in the business. Because what do the Mexican cartels care about? Money, right? They don't care about what race you are, what color you are, whether you're male, female, young, old, skinny, fat. They don't care about any of that. All they care about is, do you have the money? Are you a cop? Are you a snitch? Do we trust you? And they're going to sell it because they're in the business to make money. So think about it. The Mexican cartels got into manufacturing methamphetamine. All they care about is money. Do you think that the cartels, the influence that they have and the stronghold they have in Phoenix and their integration into the neighborhoods and all that, do you think they have family that may want access to it? Absolutely. Matter of fact, I realized that there was a true shift in Hispanics using, and right now they use at the same level as Caucasians use, Hispanics do. And before, it was almost non-existent. Before the cartels got in, I never ran into a Hispanic using. Same with African Americans or blacks. In my whole career, I arrested one black male who was using, and I think 3 that were selling, and they were selling other drugs, and meth just happened to be one of them. And I asked, like when I would arrest them for crack cocaine or cocaine, say, hey man, like why wouldn't you be using meth? It's so much cheaper. It's like when we look at it, the price and the value you get for it, the high you get and how long you get it, it's like there's no comparison. And you know what they told me? They're like, no, that's like it's like, I don't like that. And I don't want to use derogatory terms or anything because some people might be offended if I say what they told me, but they said, oh, that's like a white trash drug. That's what they called it. And and you can look at studies that show like who gets admitted into hospitals. So there's a lot of different studies out there. And based on who gets admitted to hospitals for overdoses, you can see what races they are. And then you can kind of see what drugs are being used by what races and groups of people. So I was doing drug education for schools while I was doing investigations. And the reason is I wasn't deep undercover. Like I was doing meth labs. The news was out there. almost all the time, right? There's news was out there, people were out there, and so I wasn't concerned about hiding my identity. So anytime a request would come into drug enforcement, hey, we want somebody to come out, talk to our company or school, and school is called all the time, I'd say, yeah, I'll go do it, man. I love talking to kids and love talking to adults and educating people on this topic. So I'd go out there. Well, a school called in from Maryville, the west side, predominantly Hispanic. And the school said, hey, we just had a bunch of kids, a bunch of girls that ended up overdosing on methamphetamine. And I think there were like 5 or 6. And this was a few years ago, obviously. And so I went out to the school, and what happened is one of the birthday girl's older sisters had given them methamphetamine at her birthday party. And they had taken methamphetamine, and it was the next day, but the drug was still affecting the kids. This was a middle school. We're not talking high school. This was a middle school that I think it was 7th or 8th grade girls that had overdosed. When I say overdose, they didn't overdose. They were actually just having the effects of methamphetamine, which are really, really powerful. It's the most powerful stimulant you can take. And you'll see why when we get into it. So I ended up speaking to the school and talking about it. But that was really the first time that I realized it's pretty much embedded in the Hispanic community. And I know we have quite a few Hispanic students. I looked at the roster just recently. We have a lot of Hispanic students in this class. So the unfortunate part about this is we can't share stories like, do you have any family members or friends that have been caught up in methamphetamine? And maybe we'll create a discussion board. Not sure. Usually this class, the format is a seminar where I usually don't require a test, but being it's online, I have to document or basically account for you watching these videos, right? The only way to do it is to have a quiz after each section. Otherwise, you could just say, well, yeah, I watched it all. And if you didn't, then that wouldn't be good either, because you're paying to learn, and I hope you're learning. All right, so let's hide these people. Okay, I don't even remember who this guy was, but he's undercover. Like, he's a really undercover dude. Like, look at how good he looks undercover. And so you're thinking, oh, undercover? What do you mean? Well, he's actually undercover. He's actually posing as a good guy, but he's really a bad guy undercover, looking like a good guy. So when we work undercover, we're good guys posing as bad guys. So we wouldn't be wearing DARE and like police stuff, right? So what he's doing here, it's called a good guy symbol. I write about it in my racial profiling book, and I wrote about it in my drug investigation book. There's symbols that are called good guy symbols. Like if you see cars with, I don't know how many crack, like in the old days they called them pager dealers, where the drug dealers would get a page and then they'd go call. Nowadays it's all text and cell phone and everything, but we still call them pager dealers. And so I'm going to stop this first. So these pager dealers that were driving around these vehicles, obviously they didn't want to draw attention from law enforcement. So they would have their vehicles clean, and a lot of times they would put the Fraternal Order of Police stickers on there. And a real common sticker was right there, the DARE sticker. Because it's a good guy symbol. If you have a DARE sticker on your vehicle, like you are, like drug abuse resistance education. DARE has fallen under some hard times. They revamped their whole program. If you didn't know, DARE was targeted towards 5th graders back in the day. And 5th grade is a little bit too early. And the kids loved DARE and the kids loved the officer. But they found out later on, DARE had no effect on whether the kids used drugs or not. Why? Because 5th graders, they what it did do is it showed that there was a positive relationship between police and the students, but there was no effect on drug use because the program's too early. When do kids start using again? On average, 12 years old, right? 12 years old. And so 5th grade is just too early. So they've changed it to 7th grade now. And the program still is, it's been cut in a lot of cities. It's an expensive program. And I was just in California up north towards San Francisco, and I went to a Starbucks, and there was actually a gal that had a whole table set up for DARE. And I didn't know what she was doing there. I thought she was just touting the DARE program, and she was actually seeking donations for the program. So thought that was interesting. So this gal right here, I'm into fitness. I actually worked out in the same gym as her. She looks a little scary here. Just as a disclaimer, I'm not into like women that are bigger than me. Let's just say that she was massive, but she was a pro bodybuilder back in the 80s, and bodybuilders cut up to eliminate all the fat on their body, right? And this bodybuilder actually started using methamphetamine to get cut up, because meth is an appetite suppressant and it's a major stimulant. And she thought, hey, this would be great for getting cut. Cut being, like the cuts. See, these are called cuts, getting cut up, right? So she ended up starting using methamphetamine and just tanked. Ended up, as a matter of fact, on the street, and boom, there she is. She ended up in a meth, we call them generically a crack house, but she ended up in a meth house. And somebody I worked with knew I was into bodybuilding and knew that, I don't know if they knew I knew her, but they knew I was into bodybuilding. They said, hey, check out this gal. And when I heard her name, I'm like, oh my gosh, I knew her. And she was a really nice person. She's still a nice person, but her brain, because I've kept in contact with people that work in her industry, and her brain is whacked, man. It's sad, because she lost her kid over this, ended up getting in a lot of trouble, getting fired from her employer, all because of this meth and trying to get cut up. And look at that. You want to call it a transformation. Like, meth will eat your fat and it'll eat your muscle. And the meth has basically consumed her body. So, how do you get meth into your body? Well, any way you can get into your body. Administration routes: eat it, snort it, smoke it, or inject it. So it's like eat, snort, smoke, or inject. Otherwise, we call it slamming, right? So right here into your veins. That's called slamming. And that's actually going to be on your test. So you might want to make a note of it right now. Pause for a second so you can write it down. Okay, at least I wrote it down. So there is also a 5th method to basically ingest or administer methamphetamine into your body. And you're all adults. I usually talk about it in my live class, but this is being recorded and somebody might be offended, and next thing you know, I'll be teaching, but you can look it up on how the 5th method of getting this drug into your system. And I think you probably figured it out. And sure, matter of fact, I won't say what it is, but I went on a call. I didn't go on a call. I got a report that came into drug enforcement. It was actually a sexual assault report where a girlfriend was basically assaulted by her boyfriend when he administered methamphetamine into her, apparently unwilling. I'll leave it at that. So figure it out. But it's really common, the method. So how is methamphetamine packaged? And how do you use it, right? There's all these different administration routes, and there's ways of packaging it. Well, It's packaged in little, they call these snow seals, Ziploc bags. Those are real common. Seals. Glass vials. When meth was, like in the late 90s, I found so much like methamphetamine, like containing glass vials, like really little. As a matter of fact, I'll get one. Give me a second here. I'm going to pause it. All right, if you could see my desk here, this is really scary looking, but I got so much stuff on my desk, it's not even funny. All right, there you go. One of these little tiny glass vials. I used to find meth in these things all the time because meth was, powder. As a matter of fact, I have some. Do I have some old powder here? Not sure if I have any powder, but I do. I have some crystal meth. I had powder here somewhere. Oh, here's some. This is my cocaine. Just to let you know, like all this stuff is simulated. It's not real. We actually use this to do reversal sting operations where we act as though it's a drug and we sell it, and then it's not really the drug. So I don't have any powders. Powder's old school. Like they don't even, powders is before they glass it up or they ice it, they call it. So this is probably the closest powder I have, meth powder, and that's actually really, really clean. This is usually how it ends up right here. If you can see the rocks. Or if it's not in rock form, it's in this powder form right here. Kind of hard to see it, but so that's how it's contained in bags. Like this is real common. Like usually when I found it, it was always in one of these little seals. And you know how many of these seals were in pants that nobody knew that it was in there? So what pocket do you think on a pair of pants most commonly contain this little seal right here? The coin pocket. So that little pocket on the right there in your jeans, I don't even know if they put them in there anymore. They probably don't. There used to be a little pouch pocket. They called it like a coin pocket. That's usually where the meth was. And if I got paid $1 for everybody that told me that ended up having meth in that pocket, that those were not their pair of pants, I'd be not a rich guy, but I'd definitely have some money. Because if you've ever watched Cops, that's usually, oh, those aren't my pants. Those aren't my pants. Or, oh, I just put these on. These are my friend's pants. And, oh, who's your friend? Oh, and they come up with some name. So that's usually the number one spot where you find methamphetamine is in that coin pocket. But anything will work. As a matter of fact, the cartels, when they got into selling it, they would actually, it's called snow seals, they would fold it up in paper, and they would actually use pages from a pornographic magazine. Why? Because methamphetamine and pornography, for some reason, are connected. Like every search warrant we did where there was meth involved or a meth lab, there was pornography, videos, magazines, like toys. I mean, I have no idea. I've asked a few of them, like, what's up with the porn and meth, and they just said you're just so hyper stimulated that's just part of it. So kind of strange, but it definitely goes with the culture. Okay. So if you're snorting it, you can use a pen, and they'll use a pen, and take out the ink part of it, and boom, and then take off the end cap, and now you have a snorter. Works very effective. They also use this for heroin when you're chasing the dragon, but usually they'll do a little bit of a shorter straw. Chasing the dragon is when you smoke heroin or pills, you burn it. The straws, let's see here, let me move myself. Straws are the most common just because they're cheap, they're available. You don't have to worry about finding a pen. You can go to any fast food restaurant like a Jack in the Box and get a straw. And usually the straws they're not going to, and this is how you know it's used for drugs, is you can see here the end. See how the end is cut off and it's like slanted. It's not squared off, and that's so they can get, they snort the drug that way. And there's a meth pipe. And I got some meth pipes. So here's a meth pipe. And it's got a little hole in the top. That's where you put the meth in. And because meth is a powder or a rock form, you burn it in there, but you need to vaporize it. And so usually it'll bubble and produce some fumes and the vapors, and then you inhale it. So you heat it up. And so what I found is a lot of meth users, and this is how I know if they're really like flush with drugs or if they're really hard up, meaning like they either got a lot of money for drugs and they're using a lot of drugs, or they're just really basically scraping the bottom, is how much meth is in their pipe and how much meth is in their stem. Because the stem will actually get like full of meth because it'll vaporize, and then it'll actually condense as it's going up the stem here. And like they have to clean it out because literally it'll get plugged. If they have a lot of meth, they're like a dealer or a cook and they're just like, they got as much meth as they need. It'll start getting condensed in here and they scrape it out. And let's see if I can find my scraper. I got like so much stuff on here. Anyways, but they'll scrape it out, usually use a hanger or like a metal wire. I'm sure it's here somewhere, but got everything all piled up. So now what differentiates a meth pipe like this from a crack pipe? Let me find my crack pipe. There's a crack pipe. See that? There's actually a Brillo pad in the end of it. And the reason, and here's like Brillo pads. See that? And these are actually like, these are real ones, but these were new. I mean, real, like I actually recovered these, and they were, somebody had them, but they weren't used. They were just having them in their possession so they could use it. But so with meth, you vaporize it. And a lot of times the meth users will actually melt the meth before they leave home. They'll melt it in there, and then they'll just carry their pipe around all day. And then during the day, as they start coming down off the meth high, they take a hit. Like they can go into a bathroom, take a hit, put it in their pocket, carry it around. It's like they got their drugs and their pipe. So when I would instruct at the academy, I'd always tell the new officers, like if you arrest somebody or find a meth pipe on them, same with a crack pipe. They'll do the same thing with a crack pipe. They'll melt the crack right on the end here. See? I actually have a part of a rock melted in there, and I can carry that pipe around all day, and I can smoke from it. But meth doesn't have that Brillo pad, because the meth vaporizes and they suck it in, and it melts and bubbles. Where a crack pipe doesn't melt and bubble so much, it'll melt, but it's actually still a hard substance. And so if you don't have that Brillo pad in there, and you light that crack rock and suck on it, like the rock will come right through and burn your mouth, and you don't want that. So that's why they put a Brillo pad. Basically, it's like a filter, and it acts as like a heating element. Does that make sense? Like a heating element. They heat this up, and it produces a heat that radiates like like if a heater, if you got a home heater on the floor, like a floor heater, you can see those elements in there that just glow orange. Same thing with one of these, a Brillo pad. They'll heat it up, it'll glow orange, it'll melt the crack pipe, and then they smoke it. So here's the meth pipe, and I'll tell like recruits, when you find one of these, there's sometimes, a quarter gram or an eighth gram of methamphetamine in that pipe, because they're just carrying around smoking it. Just because they don't have a baggie with drugs in it doesn't mean they're not in possession of a drug. And again, marijuana is legal in Arizona for medicinal purposes. No other drugs are legal for medicinal purposes. So methamphetamine, meth pipes, all that, it's fair game. All right. So let's Let's move on from here. This is what you'd call a meth bong or a meth water pipe. And I found a fair amount of these things, but they didn't make much sense because you got to heat meth up really, really hot. As a matter of fact, the lighter they use is usually those torch lighters where it's like a torch lighter, right? I don't know if there's a yellow dot on me or not. They'll use a torch lighter to heat up the meth because you have to heat it up really, really hot to vaporize and then inhale it. So if you heat it up and then you're sucking it through water like this, heat it up, sucking it through water, and then in the water it's supposed to cool and you get the fumes out, they don't seem very effective. And I didn't find that many of them, but they were used. So apparently you're still getting some meth through, meth fumes. I would imagine the water in here, especially meth being water soluble. I never did ask if they would drink this water or not. That's something I never asked, never thought about it. I didn't find that many of them though. And this is a hype kit, remember? The term slamming. And slamming, or a hype kit, that's used for injecting or ingesting, or basically injecting a drug. So heroin is going to look a lot like this. Same with methamphetamine. You put the meth in there, put water in there, and this is actually an old rig because they call it a rig too. Rig kit or a hype kit. The old meth had a lot of contaminants in it because they would cut it with things that you don't want to stick in your vein. So when you'd get your methamphetamine powder, then you would put it in a spoon and you'd put water in there, and then you'd put cotton, or they'd use like cigarette filters. And what they would do is they would use a syringe and they would draw the liquid through the cotton. So the cotton or the filter would hold all the contaminants, or basically the cut, if that makes sense. And then they would inject it. And when they inject methamphetamine, same with heroin, like you don't just like cold inject it right into a vein, right? You find a vein, you don't just like, no, you put your needle in there with your drugs and then you draw blood back. So, right, you draw the blood back, it swirls up with the drug, the liquid, and then you inject it in so that it doesn't shock the body. You don't want to shock the body with drugs. And that's why there are so many diseases transmitted through intravenous drug use, because basically people are drawing their blood into a syringe, injecting it, and then they're sharing that needle. I kind of chuckle at some of these cities like San Francisco, Seattle, that have these needle exchange programs, and meanwhile they're banning plastic straws because apparently they're bad for the environment or something. But you can get free needles, and there's a lot. I'm not for giving free needles. There's issues with all that, but we don't have time to talk about it in here. But any of these things are enabling drug users. So, I mean, if they can't get needles, like needles, you just can't go into a drugstore and buy needles. Like you need a prescription for them. So it's hard to get needles. If you're basically like, just come and we'll give you free needles, then it's pretty easy to get the drugs. Now you got the needles to ingest it. Other than that, they could just smoke it. But with heroin, most of the drug exchange or the needle exchange is for people that are using heroin, but you can use it for methamphetamine or whatever. Okay, so here's this is that old meth where they're absorbing. See all that nasty stuff? That's just nasty cut. And cut, if you're not sure what cut is something that they add to a drug. It's called cutting it or stepping on it. And what it means is, like, if somebody says, hey man, that, like, the stuff you gave me was all stepped on, that means that they put so much cut in there wasn't much strength to it. Or if you're a dealer, you cut it with a substance, a vitamin powder. With methamphetamine, they're actually cutting it with a pseudoephedrine binder. So they would want to pull that out because it's nasty stuff. But when you're a drug dealer, you get paid by what you're selling by weight. And so if it weighs more, you get more money. But of course, the quality isn't there. It's just, you're just stepping on the drug, making it weigh more, but the strength doesn't go up. All right, so here's methamphetamine abuse patterns. And before we get into this, we'll take a break and you can take a short quiz. And then we're going to go into the abuse patterns of methamphetamine. So see you in a few. See you in the next module.